Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Roughly Chinese. I'm your host, Mimi, and today I am joined by a very special and very highly anticipated guest, Danny Haiphong. Danny, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you here today. But I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience who may not already know you.
I'm Danny Haiphong. I'm an independent journalist, analyst, author. I have a YouTube channel focusing mainly on geopolitics under my own name. I also helped co-found Friends of Socialist China with Carlos Martinez. And we actually have a compilation book coming out, I believe, on November 6th, 2025, depending on when people see this. Many others. That is exciting. But that's mainly what I do. I mainly do daily content on YouTube focusing on geopolitics, and you can find me there.
Yes, if anybody wants any kind of update on what's happening geopolitically, please go check out Danny Haiphong's YouTube channel. And one of our previous episodes was just with Carlos Martinez. So it just feels so well-rounded that we get to have this conversation today. And all the topics that you discuss on your channel are, extremely crucial and extremely relevant to what is happening on the global stage right now. And so I want to start off this interview with a question about one of the big events that I feel like everyone is still talking about that happened on the 30th of October, which is the meeting of President Xi Jinping and Trump in Busan, Korea. So I wanted to ask you, just from your observation, your own personal commentary, what aspects of the meeting's outcomes or the agreements reached were surprising to you? Or what in the meeting in general was surprising to you?
I think what's surprising to me, or perhaps not surprising, but incredibly important, was the way in which this meeting was being spun by the Trump administration and has been spun since the beginning of it until the very end and thereafter. We have the Trump administration claiming that this has been a huge victory for the United States and, of course, for his administration. He even referenced a few times this concept of a G2, essentially saying the US and China were the biggest players on the global stage working together, when in fact the entire reason for this meeting coming about is because the Trump administration, the Biden administration before him, and then his administration, as you referenced, back in the 2016 to 2020 era, those three administrations brought us to the point where it was essentially the United States. This has to be very much put out there in front of everyone's eyes, and everyone needs to hear this, that it was the United States that had to come back to the table to China, because not only have the tariffs been a complete and utter disaster, they are having a very negative impact on the domestic political economy in the United States. Prices are very high, and there's no sign, and there will be no sign, that tariffs are going to bring some kind of industrial renaissance that oftentimes Trump hearkens to in his kind of worship of the William McKinley era of the United States. The big issue that was really at play here was what China ended up doing right before this meeting, which is announced that it was going to undertake what is a domestic political reform with international ramifications, export controls on rare earth minerals. And so China processes, I believe, 90% around of the entirety of the world's rare earth minerals. There really isn't another company in the world that can process these minerals so that they can be exported for use in the most critical technologies in the world, especially for the United States, the defense industry. That was the trump card that China pulled out. And in many respects, when you read what the Ministry of Commerce in China posted or published after they announced these export controls, it was very rational and understandable why they would undertake this kind of reform. One, it's completely within international law. It's also within the bounds of Chinese domestic law. China has every right to do whatever it wants with its own rare earth minerals. But two, and I think this is the biggest point, is that China explicitly, the Ministry of Commerce explicitly said that the reason why they wanted to regulate these rare earth minerals was because they have a specific interest in ensuring that these crucial resources, these precious metals, are used for purposes that protect and enhance global peace and security rather than damage it. And that, in my estimation, was a direct reference to how these rare earth minerals are, in fact, processed and then exported and then eventually used within defense industries and technologies, mainly in the United States, but also Europe, et cetera, that potentially could be used against China. And to be honest, when we look at all the weapons that flow into Taiwan that have been stationed all across the Asia Pacific surrounding China, that is just a fact that eventually these rare earth minerals end up in these technologies that the US is deploying to the region. So that, if you hear the words of Scott Besson, if anyone was listening to him before, during, and after the meeting, this was the primary concern. This is why the United States really had to come back to the table. The United States could continue on with the tariffs, make the American people and the American worker suffer more and more and more, bother the rest of the world and destabilize the economic situation. The U.S. is okay with this. The ruling circle, the elite, they're okay with that to a certain extent, as long as it doesn't affect them politically. But when it comes to the very functionality and the ability to build what is right now a reeling defense industry of the United States, high in profits but low in quality and low in production, that caused major panic. Not to mention the fact that these rare earth minerals are also used in cell phones, computers, etc. So all this is to say is that China came out with this huge advantage in the meeting. It had all of the leverage, and really China, a lot of people share a meme all across the internet saying, China does nothing and win. China came out of this meeting, came into the meeting wanting what it's always wanted, which is a fair, balanced trade relationship. Hell, if it was up to China, there would be low, if not zero tariffs, really, with the United
Yeah.
States. But uh, China came in just wanting the status quo, wanting things to go back to, or at least as close as possible, back to a prior period where trade relations were better. And it ended up coming out with some version of that. Essentially, it came out with the truce agreement, that 90-day truce that we saw early in the Trump administration after
Mhm.
Liberation Day, the whole bluff, the, oh my gosh, 150% tariffs on China. And then, of course, we saw what happened in Switzerland and those negotiations, which now we're basically back to square one. Higher tariffs, but nothing China is really worried about. China does not get kept up at night by tariffs.
Yeah.
China has major partners. I also forgot to mention the whole soybean issue. China has already reoriented its industry and its trade relations so that it receives soybeans from Brazil and countries like Argentina. And even with this new deal that says that China is going to buy something like 12 metric tons of soybeans from the United States, that's far below what the United States was selling to China before all of this began. So China's come out of this with essentially the status quo or better, and the United States has come out of it with the status quo or worse. And so that equation means the US ended up coming up short. But the entire point of this is really who wins, who loses. China's not even thinking about it like that. The problem is that the United States has an obsession with economic war because it believes, especially the Trump administration and those around it and those who really control US foreign policy, they believe that economic war is an effective mechanism for containing China. They believe the only way they can compete is by restraining China, is by making the quote unquote global marketplace less fair, by making it more restrictive. What's so interesting is that the Trump administration, the GOP, and really the entirety of the Washington establishment would claim that they're for the free market, that they're for business being fair, trade practices being fair. But all in all, they just want to write the rules. They want
Yeah.
it all to work for them, and they want China to be weaker and weaker and weaker. And then after this trade deal, we saw Scott Bessent go all over the Secretary of the Treasury, go all over the Western mainstream media, CNN, et cetera, saying, hey, now we need to ensure that we are in the next year developing an independent supply chain of rare earth mining and processing, a total pipe dream. All of the companies processing rare earth minerals right now are Chinese.
Yeah.
And If anybody knows how the United States economy works, its current iteration of capitalism, how it works, uh, it hasn't built anything. It doesn't really build anything because it's
Mm,
dominated by financial interests, by financial oligarchs, by those who profit the most from usurious means, not from developing an economy, not from developing industry. It does the opposite. And so to expect the United States to build a supply chain in a single year that can rival what China is doing with its own rare earth minerals is a pipe dream. Malaysia, Thailand, these countries, they should be worried if they end up in an arrangement with the United States around this, because it's probably going to end up being a disaster. There is no track record saying the U.S. can work with another country fairly in a manner that doesn't destabilize the economy and that leads to benefits on both sides. That record doesn't exist. So this is where we are with the whole trade war. It's likely going to continue. We know that the Trump administration is more keen, honestly, when it comes to China, on controlling chip production, squeezing the world around AI chips and things like this to try to prevent China from moving forward on this critical technology. That's likely where we're going to see a shift, and the Trump administration will continue to use tariffs more as a political and economic weapon with everyone else while
yes.
claiming there's a truce here. That's my prediction, and that's where I think how China came out of it, the United States came out of it. It was truly historic in the sense that this is one of the first times you will see a president in a long time go to another world leader in a neutral setting in a
Yeah.
position that was not only of their own making, like a terrible position, not only of their making, but also one that it was really the Trump administration that wanted this meeting. Trump really wanted it, and
Right.
obliged.
I mean, it's thank you so much for laying it all out on the table. And I think your predictions are very apt. I think with this whole thing, and like you said before, which I think is comical, we're kind of at square one. And so everything that we saw laid out, where the US was being the aggressor and just consistently threatening not only China, but other nations around the world with these tariffs and just having this roller coaster ride of, ups and downs and him trying to be the bully and the boss. Clearly it backfired, and we saw that has been desperate to meet President Xi for such a long time. And now that it's finally happened, I think actually the results are, you know, almost satisfying to kind of watch, because we see exactly how his, ambitions to be this world leader who bullies all the other nations is clearly fumbling a little bit. And he almost has to come to a neutral setting, to come to President Xi Jinping and kind of retrace his footsteps and go back on the certain things that he's done. So, like you said, we are at square one. And I wanted to ask you then, with Trump and his desperation and, the Trump administration having all these pipe dreams, with this meeting, what do you think Trump actually wanted it for? Do you think he knew this would be the outcome? And do you think he was successful in achieving them in like a PR perspective?
So it was quite likely that a lot of what was laid out, a lot of what was determined in the meeting was predetermined before it, through other channels. But Donald Trump, what he really wanted out of this was a win. Donald Trump is in a lot of trouble when it comes to, especially his image in terms of foreign policy. First, the Trump administration inherited the horrific Gaza genocide
Yes.
that the United States has been arming and funding and facilitating and coordinating and essentially being the lead liaison of for 2+ years. And the Trump administration came in almost guns a blazing before even stepping into office, claiming they were going to get a ceasefire in. They quote unquote did. It fell apart very quickly into the administration once he was sworn in. And ever since then, he has been the image of that genocide. And it hasn't only been until recently that there's another ceasefire that also has fallen apart. And so that was a huge campaign issue for him. It was probably one of the main ones, not only the economic situation in the US, but but Gaza, that pushed him over the top. It was quite easy to be the person who wasn't doing a genocide, to look like a more attractive option in the 2024 election. But that's all gone. His popularity rating hovers around 40 to 45%, depending on the poll, and that's been the case for quite some time now. And his losses, he brags about all these very flimsy, if not just completely fraudulent peace deals, that he talks about India, Pakistan. He goes on and on about, oh, look at all these peace deals that I did. But the one that he said he was going to get done, Ukraine, has completely fallen apart. It's fallen apart so much that the US and Russia at this point are in danger of having the last nuclear treaty between them expire in February 2026, the New START treaty. And that essentially means a new arms race is completely on the table. And it's already really started with the United States announcing a Golden Dome, that they've sent nuclear submarines off the coast of Russia. They're constantly flirting with the idea of giving Ukraine the ability to shoot tomahawks into Russia, to shoot long-range missiles into Russia under Donald Trump, who said this was not going to happen and said that in 24 hours this war was going to end. And this has compelled Russia to show off what kind of weapons it has. The Bereznik missile now, the Poseidon nuclear drone, these incredibly high-tech and destructive weapons built because of the years and years and years now, the Trump administration at the head of this, of completely reneging, ripping up, tearing apart all the nuclear and arms control treaties between them. So, and we have to remember that Donald Trump tore up one of the most important nuclear treaties in his first administration between the U.S. and Russia. So, the INF. So, all of this is to say is that Donald Trump is failing in so many ways. His foreign policy is a disaster. It's simply the status quo with a Trump stamp on it, with a kind of Trump branding to it. But all in all, what's happened is by default, the U.S. has been just as, if not more, aggressive in all areas of the world. Now we have a risk of war with Venezuela. In June 2025, the United States was very close to an all-out war with Iran, and the U.S. Cold War on China has not let up, even though Trump claims that his foreign policy now is more focused on the Western Hemisphere. I don't think there's been any evidence that the Indo-Pacific Command has shrunk, that resources have been diverted, that we've seen the military assets, aircraft carriers, naval assets, et cetera, be moved from the Asia-Pacific or the South China Sea. No, the USS Nimitz and some of these biggest destroyers are still being sent to the Indo-Pacific. And Pete Hegseth is literally speaking with a forked tongue, saying on the one hand, oh, this deal between Trump and Xi Jinping is such an example of peace in the world, and we're so much stronger together. Now I'm talking on the phone with with our Chinese counterpart, the defense minister. And then on the other, he'll say, oh, well, to our Indo-Pacific so-called allies, we're going to continue to aggressively push our agenda in the South China Sea and elsewhere in order to protect and prevent war of a so-called threatening China. So this is where Trump is in foreign policy, and then domestically, the economy is in shambles, and so many other of these kind of particular niche issues that he said he was going to resolve, like the Epstein issue and all of this, has fallen by the wayside. So he is in big trouble, and he really needed to win. And even the New York Times had to say Xi Jinping exercised the art of letting your so-called adversary look like they got a win while coming out stronger. That is essentially what happened, as much as I often disagree with what the New York Times says. That framing of it is pretty accurate. China has no interests in, embarrassing the United States or humiliating the United States or making the U.S. look bad. It doesn't really have to do that at all, because the U.S., under its current political leadership and its own economic and political contradictions, does that just fine with an elite class, with a ruling circle that just causes fires, tries to put them out, and ends up expanding them. So that is where Trump is, and that's what he hoped to get out of it. Did he succeed? It's unclear, because you have, on the one hand, a huge so-called MAGA, astroturfed activists, paid consultants, all of these people all over social media, they flood and they say, look at how great everything is. Trump is so strong. Trump is the best. We love Trump, all of this. But in general, I don't think anyone from the very beginning of this trade war who is paying attention and who isn't the utmost of China hawks could interpret the reality of the situation now as being a win for the United States or Donald Trump throughout this whole period, including this meeting. And the evidence is in the fact that anti-China sentiment has actually reduced over since the Trump administration came into office, especially since the TikTok ban brought a lot of US TikTok users to Xiaohongshu, and that led to a lot of people seeing the real China. And now it's the cat's kind of out of the bag. People want to go to China. People want to see China. And there's far less animosity toward China among the U.S. population than there was prior to Donald Trump's administration coming into power again. So that's a failure because that's not the intention. As much as Trump says he wants peace, he doesn't necessarily want people to be liking China more. He wants people to like the U.S. more. He wants people to like him more. He wants him to look like he is the most powerful figure in the world, and that the U.S. is the most powerful and most exceptional country in the world. And no, the Trump administration did not come out of this meeting with any of that intact.
Yes, I mean, he's clearly been fumbling and failing. And if even the New York Times is able to, observe what is going on, then we really have a problem here for Trump. And that is, that leads me very seamlessly to actually what I want to understand about the people of the US and how they are perceiving China. Like you said, anti-China sentiment has gone down significantly because of things like social media, like Xiaohongshu or live streamers, etc. These things have been very impactful and very powerful. And I think in a way, Trump's behavior has even contributed to make China look really good, right? But of course, the US continues to mark China as the aggressor, as the bad guy, to manufacture consent to, go to war with China. And in many ways already during this new Cold War. But I was thinking, since the US is so hell-bent on the anti-China sentiment, etc., at the same time, this tariff war has actually harmed the people of the US as well, right? I mean, prices have gone up. It already feels like so many things already were unaffordable, at least when I was living there. And after the tariff war, I'm sure things just felt more unstable. And so I wanted to ask, do the people of the US, and I'm talking about like mainstream audiences, do they understand now that, China's not the aggressor when it comes to these economic wars?
The answer to this, I believe, is probably both. On the one hand, it's quite clear the Pew Research polls, despite the reduction in anti-China sentiment that we've seen since the Trump administration really blew up its trade war. Despite that reduction, which I believe was somewhere around 10 to 15%, very significant, but it still means that of these randomly assorted and sampled uh, people, Americans, that there's still a majority of people who have negative views of China. But there's even newer research that suggests that this could be uh, actually changing dramatically even since then. So I just saw this. I just looked this up from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and the data is really damning. Right now, according to this think tank, a majority of Americans, they say 53% now, say that the United States should undertake a friendly, cooperative, and engaging relationship with China, which is up 13 percentage points since last year. So uh, this is a major change. And the reason for this major change harkens to what you were referring to, Mimi. More people now in the United States are understanding that the economic problems that they face, that the struggles that they have are really no one else. There's no one else to blame except for the policies that are being undertaken, that are being pursued by their own leaders. That is quite clear. I mean, there's been so many major moments in US history now over the last several years to underscore this, whether it was the pandemic, whether it was uh, or it is the genocide in Gaza, whether it's what's happening economically, the inflation, the economic woes, the rising homelessness. All of this is really difficult to continue to blame others around. And we saw for so many years, especially toward the end of the Obama administration, into the first Trump administration and onward, an attempt to constantly blame China or it's Russia or it's Iran for all of these problems, and always going back, delegitimizing their own election system by saying, oh, these countries are all undermining the elections, and essentially these countries are giving you leaders that are then doing terrible things. Well, eventually people are going to get very tired of that narrative when, if you're calling if you're crying wolf and then
Yeah.
essentially continue to do terrible things that only hurt the standard of living of ordinary people, then it's going to be very difficult to continue to convince people that some other country, some other leader, somewhere outside, thousands of miles away, are pulling the strings. It's a very difficult thing to keep up. And so when this trade war happened, or exploded under Trump and this administration, it was the vastness of it, and it was the fact that the economic situation was already bad in the United States. There was already a crisis, an ongoing, lingering crisis that extended through the pandemic into the Biden administration, this inflation that never goes away, and the fact that standard of living either stagnates or goes down. It doesn't change no matter what is happening, no matter what policies are pursued. And this exhaustion and resentment that a lot of Americans are feeling only exploded when these tariffs happened, because the tariffs didn't even come with an immediate promise for something good. What came with the tariffs was, we're going to collect all of this money and then we're going to force everyone around the world to bring their industries here. No one in the United
Right.
States that's paying attention, other than the most partisan, just completely loyal servants of a politician like Donald Trump. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle. Only people who are loyalists, obsessed with their political figure because they benefit from it, which is a very small number of people in the United States. Everyone else will cannot believe or has any reason to believe that their life is going to change because tariffs are supposedly bringing on trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, trillions and trillions, right? Hearing it all the time. And okay, well, we're going to get Taiwan's chip manufacturer. We're going to get, all kinds of companies, Apple, etc., to come back here and produce all the things here and give everyone jobs. Donald Trump hasn't even promised the jobs. He's just promised the industries
Yeah.
will come back. And then what ends up happening is reality, which is that you cannot replace supply chains overnight. Not only this, but the U.S. oligarchs, the monopolists, the huge capitalists that lead the major monopolies in financial institutions like Blackstone and the major big banks, etc. They have no interest in pouring money into industry. And so everyone knows this. It's very difficult. If there's one thing that everybody hates in the United States, it's banks. If there's one thing that everyone hates in the United States, it is the ultra rich right now. And no one has faith in them. This is the big issue that the Trump administration cannot resolve, because the Trump administration is stocked to the gills, filled to the gills with oligarchs. They are controlled
Yeah.
and they are funded. I mean, look at JD Vance. He is literally the spawn of Peter Thiel and the Palantir Corporation monopoly, this horrific contractor. People's viewpoint in the United States of China is shifting. And
Yeah.
it's shifting in many ways because US leaders are becoming less and less likable. It's not just Donald Trump. Donald Trump does a lot to help the situation because he thrives off of hate. That's one of the contradictions of him. He actually likes to be targeted, to be a target of criticism. He likes to be attacked because it keeps him as a so-called outsider. Um, but one thing that he nor anyone else in the US establishment can't control is the fact that the entire political class is becoming more and more hated amongst the population. And that's because of this continuity between each one of them that only leads to more misery for the vast majority. And so, as that continues to develop, people in the United States are having a more and more difficult time with this idea that they need to be worried, scared, and hate a so-called boogeyman from somewhere else in the world, especially China, which not only made a huge impression with standing up to the United States on the trade war, but has also, just by existing in the way that it does, developing its economy in the way that it does, advancing the way that it does, and also now this huge interest among Westerners, the genius move of its visa-free policies that have, if anybody has any just a bit of an algorithmic push on people traveling to China from the West, especially, you just see everywhere people from Europe and even people from the United States are going in droves and they're showing China, and it's everywhere. And they're becoming quite popular because people like to see what Chongqing looks like. People like to see what high speed rail looks like. People love to see the huge and vast scenery of this magnificently big and lush and green country. The modern infrastructure, the renewable energy. People are looking at this. When I show Speed went to China, and that was a huge soft power blow to the China hawks in the U.S. and the West. Just this YouTuber, or I should call him a live streamer, he super popular, not political really at all, but he loved China and he brought millions of people's eyes to China. He was happened to be, I mean, he's a Black American, and he was treated very well. Doesn't always happen when he travels across the
Yeah.
world, and he travels a lot. And so people were given a very different impression of China from that. So this has just been a cascading effect, and there has been a big shift, and all of it points to the fact that the U.S. empire, this imperialist system in decline, cannot just propagandize and misinform its way into uh, uh, dominance permanently. It cannot
Yeah.
maintain dominance permanently just from its ability to flood people's minds with a bunch of misinformation. It's not going to work anymore. And that's why it's getting more and more violent, more and more sensitive. That's why there's more and more surveillance. That's why there's police or military going to the streets in the US. That's why we see huge crackdowns and suppression of independent voices and movements. And we all know what's been happening to people who support and are in solidarity with Palestine here. But all of that shows the desperation, the weakness, the sensitivity, the defensiveness of an empire that, yeah, its ability to control the narrative, it has been waning, and it's only getting worse.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate what you just said about, there's a reason why there is this like high levels of suppression, why the economy is on the down. There's so many reasons why. And I think some people may look at it as, oh, the Trump administration is failing, but I don't think it's as simple as that. I think the entire US imperialist system is collapsing as it is. And kind of related to the meme that you talked about, where China has to do, just kind of sits back and the US makes China look really good, I think has been extremely interesting and also quite entertaining, I guess, on my side of things, where I get to see for myself how the US's constant, you know, desperate attempts to make China look bad constantly just backfires on itself. And it actually continues to show the people of the US what the US isn't giving to the people, what they're not investing in the people. Like you said, the tariff war didn't benefit the people at all. What did the people see out of that? What did the people of America actually gain from that situation? Really nothing. And at the end of the day, people within the US are looking towards China to see, oh, look at what is possible somewhere else that is not even considered a highly developed country, whereas the US is. And so I actually wanted to move kind of to the next portion of the conversation where actually people in China have looked towards the US as a highly developed country for quite a long time now. But clearly, things are shifting on the China side as well. And China's latest stated goal is to become a moderately developed country by 2035, with a per capita GDP reaching the standard of such nations. And I wanted to ask you, what are China's core advantages in achieving this goal? And what might be the most significant challenges, do you think, if China, were to reach its goal?
Great question. The advantages, there's a whole list. I definitely won't be able to remember or list them all based on human limitations. But the big one, in my estimation, is its political system. China's political system, despite receiving all of this hate from the U.S. and the collective West for many, many, many decades, not just in this recent period, but all of this hate tries to paint China as some kind of quote unquote authoritarian regime with absolutely no capacity to involve the people and to give the opportunity to express their desires, their wishes, and their interests to the government for the government then to act on them. And the very opposite actually is true. Not only does China's government have a massively high public trust level in the 80 to some experts in the West, mind you, from the Harvard Kennedy School and elsewhere, it's like 95%, 97% public trust in the government. And that's because China's political system has incredible advantages. On the one hand, it does offer a level of involvement, especially at the village and township level, where people have the ability to voice their concerns, to be involved in how their day to day life is organized and what they need to be able to live a more prosperous and better life. This has been demonstrated in the fact that in 2020 China eliminated extreme poverty, and the poverty alleviation campaign was completely constructed around the notion that Communist Party members had to go to the poorest and most remote areas of the country and involve themselves in that village process, in that organization of people to get involved in solving their own local problems together. And this has led to an absolute miracle where now there is no extreme poverty in China. And now China can focus on, as you said, this goal by 2035 to become a moderately prosperous economy. This is a incredible achievement that will happen, one, because of its political system, and two, because of the path that it took. People in the West have a hard time understanding how important it was for China to pursue opening up and reform when it did. Not only was the so-called world socialist bloc uh, having a hugely difficult time in navigating a very hostile political economy and world system led by the U.S. hegemon, but it was also not guaranteed that a system like socialism that China adopted in 1949 could survive without being fully integrated into the world economy. It's very difficult to survive isolated. We're seeing now, in the modern sense, outside of even this question of socialism versus capitalism, we see it, like, for example, with Russia. If Russia didn't have the friends that it did, it wouldn't have been able to survive sanctions. But it does have friends. It does a lot of friends. And China, through opening up and reform, was essentially able to make the entire world economy its biggest friend because of the way that it determined and navigated how it was going to develop and open up and use its own advantages of having a massive labor force and having this huge motivation. Every single person essentially in China, are talking about a billion to now 1.4 billion people all wanting to live better. That can lead to some incredible things, and the world reaped incredible benefits from it, including the West. The West was able to reap the incredible productive capacity of China at a very cheap cost. And then China was able to, through its socialist system, through its political advantages, by not allowing itself to become indebted and not giving up its sovereignty, it was able to obtain the knowledge, the information, the technical know-how to then apply the lessons of the modernized world economy toward its own national interests. And that has led to this economic miracle that is currently underway in China. So there is no doubt these are just some of the advantages that China has. The CPC is really the biggest one. It's over 100 million people who are dedicated to the betterment of China. And by having the ability to both, one, involve the people, like what happens through the political system from the village level all the way to the NPC, all the way up to the two sessions, all the way up to the biggest bodies and events that occur in China that determine policy, to the fact that the CPC also has the ability to consult with the people at the level of top down. This is
Yeah.
the uniqueness of China. In the United States, there's a fetish with, oh, people get to vote for who they want in the collective West. They get to vote for one of the candidates that's running. And because they voted and because they supposedly expressed their will through that vote, that means it's a democracy. But what happens after that vote is cast, what happens after that politician is elected, is that politician then works for the people that have paid for their careers and that have made their life comfortable, and who they such essentially resigned all of their loyalty and their interests to, which ends up being rich people. It ends up being oligarchs. It ends up being corporations and banks and the military industrial complex. That uh, that is not a democracy. That is
Yeah.
essentially a dictatorship with electoral features or electoral characteristics. So, a corporate dictatorship with electoral characteristics. I should be clearer
Yes.
on that. So, when it comes to China's system, the ability for the party and for the government to not only say, okay, well, people at the village level and onward can participate in the government, can express their will, and then for the government to say, okay, what do we do about that? We're going to do something about it. We are organized to not just talk and get votes and sit in our positions, but then who are we loyal to? Well, now the government has to do things, and sometimes doing things means, yeah, you don't talk about it, you don't uh you don't necessarily have a massive dialogue about it. It just gets done. And
Yeah.
this is part of China's system that is underestimated, that is demonized. But there needs to be a level of direction. There needs to be a level of leadership taken at the top to be able to act on what people, in society, what ordinary people who are not political figures, who are not in the National People's Congress or at the provincial level, delegates or whatever, people who are just living day to day, working, etc., raising families, if things don't get done for them, then the entire project that China's pursuing falls apart. And the reason it
Mm.
doesn't fall apart is because the government has many mechanisms to just get it done, to build 40,000 kilometers since 2008 of high speed rail, to become the leading producer in renewable energy in a very short time, when just a decade ago, 15 years ago, the cities in China were considered some of the most polluted and difficult to even breathe in. That has changed in
Yeah.
such a rapid amount of time. The poverty situation, and we can go on and on and on. The advantage of having a government that can work incredibly fast to get things done that people want is why there's this high level of public trust, and it's why China will continue to achieve its goals. In terms of challenges, I, I think world war, nuclear war, that to me is the biggest challenge, because for China, I don't think there is a really, the United States at this point. We've seen it in Ukraine. We see it even with Iran. We see it when the U.S. is forced to, or compels itself to, uh, confront a so-called peer competitor or larger adversary, the foes, the bigger players on the world stage of the multipolar world that it really wants to see toppled. That's kind of like the
Mm.
end game for the U.S. It runs into a lot of problems. And the
Yeah.
biggest problem is that, unlike 20, 30 years ago, when the US could, say, use a pretext like terrorism and say, we're going to go around the world and just bomb Iraq, bomb Afghanistan into the Stone Age. That's not happening with Russia. They have
Yeah.
air defense systems. They have a modern military. They have weapons that the U.S. doesn't have at all, hypersonic missiles and the like. Um, China, China has a very advanced military, and both of these countries, with their very advanced militaries, are all advanced in a way and organized in a way to defend themselves. So there's no invading China. The U.S. can't do that. The U.S. can't fly its planes over China and say, yeah, we're going to bomb China into the Stone Age. With the military option completely out in that way, the US has to rely on proxy wars, on sanctions, on other means for now. And those means aren't going to succeed. Taiwan won't become another Ukraine. And if it did, Ukraine is a defeat. And Taiwan, any kind of war over Taiwan or war, with Taiwan being the proxy, or even bringing in other players like the Philippines, anyone else, it's going to end very quickly. The economic situation is going to spiral out of control. China, within minutes to hours, can surround Taiwan and can mobilize its military in a way that will absolutely decimate the entirety of the way the economy works, especially for the United States. That it's almost like karma. It's a complete and utter backfire. The entire
Yeah.
point for the US in militarizing the Asia Pacific is to cut China off from the rest of the world, especially Asia. That's not happening. And the opposite is happening. And China has the ability to, if it had to exact incredible economic pain on the United States. But it won't, because it doesn't want that level of destabilization. It's a huge advantage for it to be able to act in a way that allows it to both pursue its own goals and to focus on specifically its own development, as well as the defensive capacity, the security it needs to continue onward with it. So, in terms of the biggest challenges, it's when and if. I tend to think when, unfortunately, when the US ruling circle realizes that the empire will now be number two or three, even number two in economic size, number two in innovation, number two in technology. And when the world continues on this process of China being the um, primary economic motive force of development and production, when that process cements itself further to a point, um, a lot of US policymakers, especially those within the hawkish military industrial complex and the military circles, are going to have to make a very difficult decision. Do they just drop their entire agenda and say, well, that's kind of it. We're done. The only thing we can do now is be a lesser competitor to a different world? Or does it go out with guns a-blazing? And that means likely the nuclear option, because there really is nothing left. To get to that point, though, needs a massive pretext, needs a massive destabilizing event or series of events that it's really difficult to imagine happening without major consequences. So this is the bind, really. This is the bind that even the challenge that China faces um, runs up against. And that bind is the fact that if your only weapon is to blow it all up, then you truly are in a very bad situation. And so this is where the US empire is. This is the biggest challenge that China will have to face. It isn't to say that the US won't continue to wreak havoc all around the world and try to choke off China by choking off and trying to destroy and manipulate and overthrow or control or find all kinds of ways to destabilize any political situation worldwide that's favorable to China, any trade arrangement that's already happening. But look at the results. Even that visit, we were talking before we came on here about the meeting in South Korea between Trump and Xi Jinping. Uh, when Trump went to Japan and met the prime minister there, and she was just so happy to see him. She was so just
Thrilled.
deferent, and she was just so, it was like, it was like watching someone. It was like Donald Trump was like had a cheerleader or something.
Yeah.
It was like the athlete with the cheerleader on, yeah, 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 we love
Yeah.
you, we love you, we love you. Even that is even that level of subservience to the United States, which Japan has a long history of since the end of World War II,
Yes.
that can't stop the fact that Japan needs China economically. And with 100 US bases, hell, that meeting, that whole spectacle happened on a US aircraft carrier with Trump. Uh, Despite all of that, Japan can't break off its ties with China.
Yeah.
It can't. If it does, Japan's economy will be even in worse shape than it is now. So uh, we have talks of a South Korea, Japan, China, almost like a trilateral economic relationship. That's that's that shouldn't happen if the U.S. had the ability to choke off China, and so
Yeah.
we are in an unprecedented moment where China is moving into this position of, I won't say invincibility because there's no such thing, but it's moving into a position of incredible strength, economic strength, the ability to defend itself, a political system that works, that people like, that they trust, and all of that is giving the US's overall agenda of weakening and containing China major headaches, major problems, likely intractable and unsolvable problems, where the real risk is, well, are there people within the ruling circle, if we can call them people? Are there forces within the ruling circle in the United States that are um, destructive enough to take it to the next level? That will be something we will have to keep an eye on as all of this develops.
Wow, Danny. I mean, thank you so much for kind of laying it all out, not only from present, but also from the past, and then giving us kind of a portal into the future. And I think you really illustrated the possibilities. And to be honest, when you were speaking, I was filled with a form of optimism, because even though obviously the threat of nuclear war is very much present and very much there, and this small amount of oligarchs and billionaires are there, and they're desperate and hungry, and you can't poke a scared bear, right? But I think at the end of the day, when you look at it, when we zoom out, we know that the US is not the world, even though it tries to be. And the people of the world, they don't want nuclear war. And that is an unavoidable fact. So I just wanted to thank you so much for all of your insights from today's episode. It's such a pleasure and joy to have you on. And I'm, again, such a fan and an admirer of the work that you do independently and also as Friends of Socialist China. You truly are friends of ours. And yeah, just wanted to thank you so much for coming on the program. And I hope you can come in again soon, just even in person in the studio. So thank you
Yes,
so much, Danny.
same. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yes. And thank you everyone so much for watching this episode of Roughly Chinese. Please stay tuned for the next one and like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what else you'd like us to discuss. Bye.